All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I know it's on the early side on the West Coast. Thank you all for making the time to be here with us. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge the organizations and folks who made this work possible. A Farmer's Toolkit is being led by the Rodale Institute with funding from the USDA the USDA Top program, the Transitioning to Organic Partnership program. It's been strongly supported by the Organic Trade Association, which has been very generous with its data and feedback and knowledge. I also want to acknowledge each of the regional top leads and the regional top partners who have all been very generous with their time in giving us feedback, data, and information and helping us make this a much more powerful and useful tool for farmers around the country. The support of these organizations reflects their deep belief in the value of organic farming and farmers and the importance of strong regional food systems. My name is Joe Dixon. I am a senior associate at Wolf and Associates, and I've been working on organic agricultural policy and issues for about 25 years. I was the global director of quality standards at Whole Foods Market for about 15 years, leading that company's work on standard certification programs and organic certification, working a lot with organic producers, farmers, processors, and others around the country, helping them connect with retailers and distributors. I served from 2010 to 2015 as a member of the National Organic Standards Board, and I'm currently the board president at PCO, Pennsylvania Certified Organic. My work as an advisor and a consultant these days is focused on helping retailers, brands, certifiers, farmers, and nonprofits foster resilient regional food systems and flourishing organic farms. And while I'm based in southern Vermont in the northeastern US, the top right corner, I do spend a fair amount of time in the top left corner in the Pacific Northwest. I am a board member at Carnation Farms, a education and organic center and organic farm and community hub in Carnation, Washington. And I work very closely with one of my favorite clients, PCC, the country's largest consumer-owned food co-op based in Seattle with 16 stores in that region. So while I'm not in the Northwest, I do love the Pacific Northwest and feel deeply connected. So what are we doing here today and why? A farmer's toolkit is a set of tools for transitioning and established organic farmers to help them with understand actionable insights on the big national organic economic picture, the regional organic economic picture and outlook, and guidance on how to work with distributors, retailers, and other buyers of organic food. This project was created by Wolf and Associates for the Rodale Institute, again with strong support from so many others, including the OTA, the National Organic Coalition, and the regional top leads. The toolkit has three major components. There is a national toolkit that has, sort of national data and information about the organic sector. There are regional toolkits. We created one for each of the six top regions, and then a few of the bigger regions we split up. Southwest got split from West, Northeast got split from Mid-Atlantic. For the Northwest, it's one module, but we do have a sort of supplement within it on Alaska, which is part of the Northwest top region. And then we have a buyer's landscape. That is the product of interviews that our team at Wolf and Associates did with about 23 buyers around the country, representing retailers, distributors, schools and hospitals, and processors. There's also a set of handouts that will be available after the session. Those take sort of the most concrete and actionable data and information from these presentations and package it into a 4-page handout that is a good leave behind for events you're doing with farmers or just a good reference for yourselves as you may not want to rewatch the whole hour-long recording, but most of the basic information is there. All of these resources will be available starting next week, the week of December 22nd, on organictransition.org, the top website, and on the Rodale Institute website's resource section. So watch for this information in the next week. So before we get started, I'm going to talk through the three modules, the national, the Northwest module, and the buyer's landscape. What I will ask is that as you have questions, comments, or feedbacks as I'm going through, we're a relatively small group today of about a dozen people. So if you have questions or comments as I'm going through, just pop them right in the Q&A or the chat. I'm watching both of them. Um, and I will pause at the end of each of the three sections for any questions that have come up that pertain to that particular section. Sorry, this is my first call of the day. Um, So the project was built on a simple goal to give farmers clear and actionable information about the markets you're serving. We look at both the national picture and the regional variations because those two systems are deeply interconnected. What's happening nationally, demand, imports, consumer behavior, really shapes the opportunities on the ground in every part of the country in slightly different ways. Um, At a high level, organic demand for organic products in the US continues to grow very steadily. Even as the broader food market slows its growth, organic is outpacing it, and that's been true for many years. While every region is unique, understanding where this demand is coming from helps guide decisions around crop selection, storage, processing, and investments in diversification on your farm. Let's get into some of the key facts and insights. I'm going to speed through a few slides here. We have a lot to cover today. So, at a high level and real numbers, in 2024, the organic market in the US had $71.6 billion in retail sales. That is a huge economic sector. Year over year growth of organic sales in the US is at 5.2%. It's up a little bit from the year before, and projections for the next several years show that staying pretty steady. We think that year-over-year growth will, certainly outpace 4%, if not higher, over the next several years, growing at about twice the rate of the conventional food market. The OTA's forecast here shows organic sales exceeding 85 billion by 2029. Bottom line, organic isn't a fad or a short-term trend. I think a lot of us who've been working in the space for a long time know that. It's a mature and it's a durable market. While growth is a little bit down since 2020, when the pandemic, resulted in some very unique purchasing patterns, year-over-year growth remains very stable. And that means there's room for more domestic organic supply, if we can build the systems and the infrastructure that we need to support it. Of that $72 billion in sales, about 21 billion or 30% is produce. That's always been the leading category in organic. That said, we're seeing a broader mix of other organic products. Packaged foods growth outpacing the sector in general. Beverages, especially as we're getting into healthier non-alcoholic beverages, tonics, and elixirs, organic is playing a really big role in beverage growth. And then in animal products, those, dairy and eggs and meat and poultry together make up over 15% of the organic sector. And that is one of the areas where we're seeing the highest growth year over year for the past few years. Meat and poultry in general, and a little slice of seafood, although that doesn't play a major part because the USDA standards don't really allow for much organic seafood. But the meat poultry category is up 16% year over year, with organic beef sales in the US up almost 37% year over year. Dairy and eggs are really steady, with eggs representing a huge part of that growth at 16.1% year over year. Textiles are also showing incredible growth. And it's interesting because, cotton growing in the US is very limited because, to have the right climate and dryness that you need to grow cotton, it really restricts it to a few areas of the country. But despite those limitations and some limited infrastructure, we see good growth in textiles and fiber as well. Some of the factors driving this growth, we know that consumers are becoming more and more aware of the dangers of ultra-processed foods. That's led people to search for foods with cleaner ingredients, and that extends to organic because not only does organic prohibit a lot of the ingredients people are avoiding, artificial colors, flavors, sweeteners, preservatives, it also prohibits the use of toxic and persistent pesticides in production. And I think all of those factors have led people to avoid ingredients that are harming their health. A shrinking price gap, a narrower difference between organic and conventional, is showing up in several categories. I think as categories scale, and retailers play a bigger role in promoting organic. Health trends are a huge factor here. This is the first organic market report where I've seen weight loss drugs come up as a factor. But according to the analysts, that's one of the reasons that, as people are eating less because of these drugs, they're focusing on cleaner ingredients and cleaner eating habits, and organic plays a role in that shift in ingredient selection for a lot of consumers. And then generational shifts. I cannot overstate the importance of generational shifts. I'm what's called a geriatric millennial. I'm in my mid 40s. And millennials have driven a lot of adoption of organic, especially as our generation has aged into being parents. But Gen Z is taking that even further. As that next generation ages into buying groceries, living independently, and having kids, compared to any other generation, Gen Z outpaces them all on sustainability, animal welfare, transparency, authenticity, and local and regional identity. That is a force that is not going away, and I'm really optimistic about how that will shape the organic sector over the next decade and beyond. What do we produce? The section before focused on what we eat, what we buy at the grocery store. This section's about what we grow as a country, and there's a mismatch between what we eat and we grow. We import a lot of organic stuff, and I wanted to kind of tease this out to paint a full picture of what that all looks like. So on the production side, fruits, vegetables, dairy still dominate, but grains and proteins are lagging a bit. That lag in production represents huge opportunity. We know that we're importing a lot of grains, some animal protein. And we see market signals there that the market wants more organic ingredients grown domestically. What we buy versus what we grow kind of shows us some opportunities that, on a long-term basis or medium-term basis, represent real opportunities to produce domestically some of what we're importing from outside of the US. We import about $2.5 billion in organic produce. At least 300 million of that is just blueberries alone. $223 million in imported tomatoes. And we know that feed grain imports have tripled or quadrupled over the last several years. Organic cotton and textiles are almost entirely imported. We in the US are a strong organic market, but we have huge opportunities to produce more of the organic products we consume and the feed that organic animals consume in the US. I just want to emphasize here the mismatch between demand and supply isn't due to a lack of farmer interest or skill. These issues are largely structural and systemic and bigger than any one of us. Processing and storage infrastructure and its availability and affordability, opportunities for aggregation of products through distributors, land access, land costs, labor access, labor costs, and season length. There's a lot of variables here that impact our ability to produce stuff domestically. But we see that gap as solvable with the right level of collaboration across governments, NGOs, advocates, and farmers across the country. So to sum up the national picture, organic is growing steadily, but it's not just growing in a linear way and getting bigger and bigger. It's evolving. We see ongoing growth in produce, but serious growth that outpaces that in grains, animal products, fiber, and value-added processed goods. And that makes me really optimistic about the future of the organic sector in this country. Now I want to bring this discussion home to the Pacific Northwest. We drew on a lot of feedback from the region, USDA, and other federal data about production to really take this national picture and zoom into the Pacific Northwest. So I will shift there now. Um, the Pacific Northwest is truly diverse in its agricultural production. It's a workhorse of organic agriculture. It's not just participating in organic growth, it's carrying a big share of it. I think Washington State is the number two in terms of organic sales in the entire US. I want to show here is how the Northwest as a region, as an interconnected region, combines scale, diversity, innovation, and highlight where we see some of the opportunities for farmers on the ground in the Northwest. Um, The Northwest is defined by range. You have coastal valleys, inland plains, dryland grains, the whole Palouse in the eastern parts of Washington, irrigated fruit production, massive acreage, small specialty crop farms. It's the Northwest has it all. And that diversity is an incredible strength for the region. It spreads risk, supports many different farm models, and it keeps the region resilient even as climate, markets, and policy shift. Organic is deeply established in the Northwest. Washington and Oregon are two of the national leaders in organic sales and processing, while Montana and Idaho and Wyoming bring scale, hundreds of thousands of certified organic acres with room to grow. That's what makes the Northwest really special. Big acreage paired with strong markets in the cities and good infrastructure. It's not just about producing organic products, it's about connecting those producers to buyers, processors, and consumers. The Northwest is a backbone of our organic supply, representing almost 3,000 certified organic operations, 1.39 million certified organic acres. Um, really a backbone of our supply nationally. Here's a chart by state that shows how each state contributes a little differently to the overall Northwest picture. Washington leads in organic sales. Oregon blends production with value-added processing. Montana and Idaho anchor national grain and feed supply, and potatoes, of course. And Alaska, which we include as a sort of separate supplement, it's a smaller market with the greatest imaginable constraints on growing season and climate. But it shows how organic can adapt even at the very edge of the continent. Even with just 5 states, the Northwest punches hard. Washington ranks number 2 in organic sales, I mentioned. Oregon still sits in the top 10 with nearly 500,000 certified organic acres. Montana ranks number 3 in the country for organic acreage, focused on grains and cattle. And Idaho supplies potatoes, feed, dairy inputs. And then in Alaska, we see, more focused on vegetable production, but innovation and season extension, and really creative ways of extending the season and growing vegetables as long as possible in a really limited climate. Now let's talk about opportunity. The Northwest climate range and land base support everything from perennial fruit to dryland grains to livestock. That flexibility creates a lot of room for scaling staples and growing higher value specialty systems. Tree fruit and berries are one of the areas where the Northwest really stands apart. In a lot of ways, they're a signature part of the sector. Washington alone accounts for nearly 90% of organic apple acreage in the US. As a Vermonter, it pains me to hear that a little bit, but we're such a tiny state. We do have good organic tree fruit production, but Washington just blows everyone else out of the water. Oregon leads in organic blueberries and small fruit processing. The opportunity here with fruit isn't just more acres, it's smarter systems, diversified orchards, integrated pest management, more, accessible cold storage opportunities for growers to even out the year, and value-added processing that can help mid-scale farms enhance their profitability with more diverse revenue streams. When we move inland, the picture obviously changes, but the opportunity is incredible. Montana, Idaho, Eastern Oregon form a critical grain and feed corridor for organic dairy, poultry, and livestock nationwide. I'd throw Eastern Washington in there too. I don't know why I left that out of my comments. Strengthening regional grain to feed supply chains strengthens the dairy sector. It improves soil health through thoughtful rotations, and it keeps more value local instead of shipping these inputs a very long distance. Beyond fruits and grains, the Northwest is expanding diversified vegetable production and pasture-based livestock. Washington and Oregon continue to grow with high-value organic vegetables, carrots, greens, tomatoes for regional and national markets. In Montana and Idaho, of course, we're seeing a lot of increased poultry, beef, egg operations, and a local feed supply that is very unique to the Northwest. A lot of other big animal production regions are pretty far from where feed is produced, and that remains a big opportunity and growth area for the region. And then in Alaska, we'll talk a little bit about them separately, but even then, we've seen a doubling down on greenhouse vegetables, high tunnels, season extension methods, and direct to consumer and institutional markets. What ties it all together, I think, is balance. I mean, it's hard to summarize the whole region because it is so diverse, but we have coastal fruit and vegetable systems in both coastal states, inland grain and livestock production. And zooming out to a regional level, a system and a balance that spreads out risk, supports soil health, and really anchors the national supply and has impact far outside the region. In general, I think there are some opportunities for investments in storage and processing and distribution to keep more value in state, reduce dependence on produce and products that are imported, not just from outside of the US, but from other parts of the US. One of the things I'm talking about in every region of the country is ways that each region can reduce its dependence on products that are from away, whether that's from another state or from Europe or South America. Where do we see those onshoring opportunities in the Northwest? A lot of this will be a little redundant with what I've been talking about, but in general, we're talking about shortening supply chains that already run through the region and capturing more value along that value chain. So even here in the Northwest, there's a lot of high demand organic products that travel long distances before they land on the shelves. Feed grains move across states, fruit gets shipped out for processing and shipped back in some cases. And vegetables come in from a lot of other regions during shoulder seasons, or just simply because there's more supply and it's a little cheaper. The opportunity is to pull more of that activity closer to where production actually happens. For grains and feed, that means, more growth. And there's been so much good growth in regional cleaning, milling, and storage, but we see a lot more capacity potential there. For fruit, cold storage, packing, value add, juice, drying, all of those opportunities that allow growers to market seconds, manage risk, diversify revenue, and smooth out cash flow are huge opportunities in the region. And for vegetables, it's not the mainland or the contiguous US parts of the Northwest aren't as cold and have a really generously long season compared to a lot of other parts of the country. But there's still opportunities around season extension, controlled environment agriculture, high tunnels and greenhouses that could enhance regional supply and make it more steady throughout the year. General opportunities for the region. Aside from the onshoring opportunities, I wanted to highlight where, according to the data and the conversations we're having, there's really clear demand, production is proven, and there's still gaps supply-wise in the system. Across the Northwest, there's a strong and growing demand for organic grains, feed crops, fruits, vegetables, animal products, not just from national buyers, but from regional processors, institutions, and retailers. And when you look at Portland, Seattle, the cities of the region. Like there's nowhere that's more saturated with natural food stores and buyers who are really seeking out natural and organic products. On the consumer side, the Northwest has a lot of strength that we don't see in other parts of the country in the same way. Um, and for a lot of these crops, what's not often missing is farmer capacity, it's midstream capacity. It is infrastructure, it's storage that allows farmers to market over time instead of all at once, especially in the fruit sector. It's processing that supports mid-scale producers. It's distribution systems that connect inland production with coastal populations and technical and transition support for farms that are ready to scale or diversify. I know there are lots of folks in the region and nonprofits and governmental folks providing that technical and transition support in the Pacific Northwest, and we see that as really critical to this next phase of organic growth. And then finally, barriers and solutions. I've probably alluded to most of these as I've been kind of rambling and jumping ahead in my presentation, but there's a number of barriers to organic growth, some of which are being addressed and met in really innovative ways. We talked about fragmented midstream infrastructure, whether that's processing or storage, climate stress and water variability. That that is a really, it's not a, we're not going to necessarily fix the root causes of that, but we can better prepare for it with drought resilient systems, soil health focus, perennial crops, crop selection that is evolving with climate stress and water variability. Um, Land access in high value counties, that remains a really big issue. There are some amazing organizations working on those access issues throughout the Northwest, but we're seeing that around the country, especially in the coastal areas, this tension between residential landowners in very high value counties and access to good farmland. And we still see, and it's not unique to the Northwest, bottlenecks in organic grain, an opportunity for better storage, cleaning, feed infrastructure to match the growth potential out in the fields. All right, I'm going to take my breath, catch my breath, have a sip of water, and then talk about Alaska. As I'm talking, please don't hesitate to jump in on the questions or the Q&A with anything on your mind as I'm talking through. This is a strange format because I can't see anyone's faces and I'm just sitting in my office kind of talking at the wall and hoping that your heads are nodding. All right. So Alaska, it's one of the smallest parts in terms of market share, not in terms of geography of the Pacific Northwest. About 1,292 certified organic acres based on 2022 data. 12 certified organic businesses, probably more than that are following organic practices, but so many probably fall under the certification threshold. Big focus on, what grows in a short season, vegetables, tomatoes, and herbs. And what characterizes Alaska? Season extension isn't optional, it's essential. Everything you do in Alaska has to be centered on adaptability, and awareness of the short season, cold temperatures, and really short growing season. We're seeing, of course, among those organic operations up there, most of them are using some sort of greenhouses and high tunnels to start earlier and grow later. Um, in like Hawaii and other distant areas, the cost of food is amplified by the transportation that it has to largely undergo to get there. And so, organic local production supports local food security and more affordability and independence from imported produce, which is really important the more remote you get. A lot of Alaska organic is characterized by direct sales models, CSAs, direct farm gate sales, and farmers markets. Um, and yeah, so in Alaska, I think we see what organic looks like when adaptability is the foundation and the priority. The barriers I think we've discussed and are pretty clear. The short growing season, which can be addressed through greenhouse expansion, controlled environment ag, high input and shipping costs are a barrier. There's some opportunity there as far as local composting and resource sharing among the agricultural community there. Certifiers have difficulty getting there. The cost of inspection is and certification is, of course, a barrier around the country. But when there isn't a certifier on the ground and people, are having to fly in sometimes from great distances, that adds to the cost of organic production. It also adds some logistical barriers and complicatedness. And in Alaska too, it's a limited consumer population and limited consumer awareness of organic and its benefits compared to other parts of the country where there's just a more robust public dialogue happening and more population density to, experience organic benefits. Onshoring opportunities are virtually everything. Most of what Alaska consumes is imported from other parts, but we see big opportunities in producing more leafy greens, more root vegetables and crops with a lot of storage potential, herbs that are adaptable to quick indoor or high tunnel production, and small scale egg and dairy opportunities. So to summarize kind of what I've talked about the Northwest in general, it's a cornerstone of U.S. organic agriculture, some of the highest consumer demand that we see, similar to the Northeast in terms of just really well-established, well-educated consumers in cities, really understanding the benefits and looking for organic. We have massive acreage, especially in the eastern parts of the region, incredible diversity of types of crops and systems across that wide region, and lots of room to scale responsibly and thoughtfully, but so much growth potential for the reasons we've mentioned. With continued investment in better infrastructure, organic transition technical support, and leveraging the Northwest regional identity. We think the region is really well positioned to play a huge role in the next chapter of organic growth. It has land, it has farmers, it has wisdom and experience, it has great markets, um, and know-how. A really solid web of advocacy organizations, certifiers, and folks helping farmers flourish and grow out there. So thank you all for the work you're doing every day, managing risk, taking care of your land, and growing organic. I hope that this snapshot has been helpful in sort of contextualizing what we see in the Northwest in a bigger national economic picture. And yeah, don't hesitate to reach out if we can dig deeper. I do want to highlight too, it's hard for me because, this is a big region of many states with a lot of diversity. And for this version of the project, we're really limited as far as how deeply we could research and how granular the information we could present could be. Next year, starting pretty quickly after the new year, we want to evolve this more and make it even more regionally specific and solicit really directed feedback from the folks in the region on how we can make this better. We know we have better opportunities to get more reliable and granular data on the import scenario. It's really hard to do with the government databases that exist, but would like to get that a little more actionable and detailed. Um, and would love feedback from producers in the region and the organizations that work with them on what resources, what information, and what additions to this project could be really helpful for farmers out there. So share that feedback either here today in the Q&A in the chat, or as we go through the next phase of the project, we'll be reaching out directly to each of the top leads in the regions and all of their partners to really dig in more and make this even better. All right. Seeing no questions in the chat, I'm just going to keep talking. Oh, look, questions. Um, Matt, that is a really good question on what resources we can point to for people interested in land access grants and trusts in Washington State. We are, for part of this work, pulling together a resource page that is here now, and this will be in the materials that are shared, but I will make sure we connect with folks in the region and make sure we have some specific guidance on organizations working on land access issues in Washington State. I know a few of them, but I'm sure there are more. Um, and Kate, you brought up a really good dynamic too that's come up several times this week, talking through this in other regions, that Washington, but also Oregon have a strong local movement that seems to compete with organic, especially in livestock and with berries. Are these farmers the organic opportunity, or should we instead be focused on the larger farming operations? It's such a tricky one. I mean, with livestock, it's been amplified too by the escalating and skyrocketing costs of organic feed and the supply issues there. We've seen a lot of, organizations that once were only buying organic meat, change their criteria and, focus on either non-GMO fed proteins or just conventionally fed proteins, because organic feed has been a giant barrier for a lot of livestock producers out there. Um, and I think it kind of depends on the region and the retail buyer or the farmer's market. Like, this came up. I was meeting with a group of producers in Maine last week, and we were talking about the value of the USDA organic seal. And I think for some growers, where they're selling largely to direct to consumers at the farm gate in local markets, they're talking face to face to all their consumers. They probably see less value in the seal because they can communicate what they're doing to their growers. But then among the retailers I work with, there's incredible value to the seal. Retailers know that it is shorthand for so many important practices, and it's a story that they're getting better and better at telling to their consumers. So I think, the local versus organic thing, I wish it didn't have to be a versus and could be both. For me personally, local plus organic is the most important. And, the environmental impact of agricultural chemicals matter the most where we live. I mean, they matter everywhere, of course. So I think, Kate, to answer your question in a rambling way, um, I think there's opportunities to make local producers more organic, but it requires careful alignment around among retail and distributor buyers who also value organic and local. Chandra's question. I'm a very small organic blueberry farm in the east side of the Cascades. I struggle with intentions growing my crops and diversifying what we grow. I'm focused on soil health and all of it, looking for mentorship and small farm to consumer help and climate resilience and crop diversification. Chandra, that's such a good question. And I know that the technical assistance and support is out there in the region. Definitely connect with us offline and we'll make sure we connect you with the right folks, at Oregon Tilth and, through their role as regional top lead, certainly have some partners and insights on folks that they can connect you with. So, um, yeah, we would love to connect you with the help. I'm going to put my email in the chat. And Bridget, if you would put in the chat the right Rodale Institute email to use, I think is it markets@rodeleinstitute.org. Awesome. Thank you, Bridget. So yeah, that email to the Rodale Institute, which also has incredible presence and support available in the Pacific Northwest. Brenda, thank you from WSDA, highlighting that the WSDA regional markets and organic program have great resources available in Washington State. And I'm putting my email address here too. So Chandra, reach out to all of us and we'll work to find you the right resources. Really appreciate the question. Awesome. All right, I'm going to keep talking and keep throwing in questions and comments as we go through the rest of the presentation. We've gotten through like 45 slides in 40 minutes. I'm really proud. Just a few more to go. All right. So the buyer's landscape, final component of our toolkit, it paints a picture of what the landscape looks like for buyers, retailers, distributors, schools, processors, and other institutional buyers. This past August and September, we interviewed 23 buyers of organic products from across the US and across a spectrum of categories, from a single unit independent natural food store to a director of purchasing for a school system feeding 28,000 students each school day. This is an area, by the way, too. We got a really good picture from this, but I want to make it bigger and more granular. And for the next round of this, talk to even more buyers around the country of different scales, so that we can make this information even more useful for everyone. One of the things our team found in interviewing the buyers is that their personality type varies quite a bit. They're not one monolithic group. A natural foods retailer on the small scale is going to behave differently and act differently than Costco or Kroger. A food hub, a school district buyer, a grain buyer, they're all operating under different constraints. They all have different ways they got to their position. Some are deep organic believers who know the benefits in and out. Some are from a more conventional background who know there's consumer demand, but don't necessarily remember all the details and the benefits and benefit a lot from us reminding them the why of organic. And one of the biggest potential issues we heard about from the buyers is assuming that the approach that works for one type of buyer will work for all of them. Um, One of my goals for this toolkit and this section of the toolkit is to help folks match their outreach and expectations to the type of buyer that they're talking to. Um, you know, we crystallized some of their feedback on how they meet potential suppliers. Here's a quick overview. None of this is too shocking, but it does confirm, what we understood to be the case, that conferences and trade shows and field days really matter. A lot of buyers will talk to their existing suppliers about other folks in their region, their neighbors that may have supply that they're interested in. There are a lot of directories around the country on organic farmers and more information of their supply. And every buyer we talk to, will get more into this. They love cold calls. Like they start relationships with a lot of their suppliers and growers from getting a call, an email, a sample dropped off. And that's really important. I also want to highlight too, several of the buyers, especially smaller regional retailers, really depend on the work of food hubs, which are smaller scale distribution companies, sometimes nonprofit, sometimes for profit, but they're all really focused on getting product from smaller and medium growers, aggregating it and providing it to retailers in greater numbers and greater consistency. It, allows access to markets for smaller producers that might not otherwise have had that access. Here are what our team distilled as the 6 C's of working with buyers. Communication. Buyers prefer over communication, even if the news is bad, especially if the news is bad. One of the things we heard is if there's an issue with supply or a crop or an unexpected climate event or whatever it is, share the info as soon as you have it. They'd rather get the bad news early than be surprised closer to when they're expecting a delivery. Consistency is really important. Quality, sizing, type of packaging, all of that, really matters to buyers, especially the bigger you get. Caring, they buyers we talk to on a two-way street, a mutually beneficial relationship. These are all humans who really connect with other humans and really, really care about their producers. Collaboration is really important. Collaboration among producers specifically. Farms that work together to fill a truck in a rural area that they might not have been able to fill on their own. The role that food hubs play in aggregating supply, and other ways that farmers can work together to provide more stable and consistent supply are really appreciated. Connection is important. Every buyer we talk to loves to have boots on the ground on a farm. And one of the reasons for that is to know their growers' stories, their authentic stories, their passion for what they grow, where they grow, and why. So they can actually tell that story to their consumers. And then cost was a really big part of the conversations. I think there's a lot of frustration sometimes between growers and retail buyers when they realize that farmers market pricing is generally not available from retailers. They all work within structures that have really specific margin expectations and a lot of potential confusion in the relationships centers around cost. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Communication matters. They were very consistent here. Every buyer we talked to, and as we talked to more, we were like kind of drilled down on this. Like they all value really clear communication, quick responses. A lot of them are working under, very strict deadline pressure, fewer surprises, and letting them know as soon as something changes. They also recognize that farmers are really busy and often in the field. It's often hard to answer your phone if you even have it with you. But the more you can, check your voicemails, check your email during the day, maybe delegate to someone who isn't in the field. That really matters. A lot of them work in retail orgs where everyone's email is always on and they're just used to hearing back from people. Consistency came up even more than price came up in our conversations. Um, Buyers want consistent quality within reason, predictable supply, and clear expectations. And I think, that what quality looks like varies wildly depending on whether you're talking about apples or blueberries or, steak. But have a conversation about how they define quality, how much variability they're open to, and what they consider success and quality in your product. Caring matters. Personal connections matter. um Deep conversations, getting to know each other really matters. The buyers value farmers who ask questions and understand the constraints they're under. By farmers who are patient and persistent, and a real story. So many buyers told us they want the uncensored, like, here I am, here is why I do this, here's my motivation and my struggles. Like they really love the authentic story and connection with farmers. And the buyers often have similar stories, and It's useful to get to know each other just like any business relationship, especially to foster multi-year, longer-term commitments and connections. Um, a lot of buyers emphasize collaboration, especially institutional buyers and fiber buyers. This doesn't matter, apply too much in the Northwest, but the fiber piece. But institutional buyers is interesting. Schools and hospitals, universities, elementary school systems, they love when farmers work together to provide bigger and more consistent supply. A lot of institutional buyers told us like they could buy organic pears and apples every day of the school year, but sometimes they struggle to find the supply they need from a single grower. But when growers work together through a cooperative or just an informal collaboration, it really helps. Connection matters. Buyers want to see the farm whenever possible, walking the fields, understanding the practices, building advocacy internally. It helps them go back to their bosses, their, head of merchandising at a grocery chain or whoever it is, and fight for you and fight for a bigger penetration of organic. In some cases, to fight for softening some margin expectations for a truly local organic product. They love to see farmers come to the store and understand the category that they're going to be in, who else is in it, where do they fit within it, um, and understanding how your product shows up to the consumer, helping the retailer tell your story, whether it's having that buyer out on your farm or like finding someone to help create, really concrete talking points about what makes your farm special and unique in a way that they can put onto a shelf talker or a sign or their social media. And photography matters too. This came up. I was at the session I was at Maine last week. It came up too, and it came up for buyers we talked around the country. They love, if you put in their hands the really succinct story and great photos of you smiling in your field, that really matters, and it helps them sell your product, and it helps a consumer pick your product over a competing conventional or cheaper organic product in the same set. And then finally, cost matters. That's this. Chris is a buyer at a national natural food chain, and he said, "I cannot pay farmers market prices. That's often an awakening for growers. I cannot sell a head of lettuce for 5.99, and that's an unfortunate reality. Most retail buyers and institutional buyers are constrained in what they can pay. They have, a retailer typically has a 40% or so margin that they're held to. Distributors also take margin, and that's, it's really challenging for growers to fit within that structure. And I think, what's really important is to make sure you understand that margin structure and what they're willing to pay at the outset of the conversation. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But, have that conversation early about what the terms are, and find out if there is any flexibility. But that was really, one of our themes in talking with everyone. And, some of the national retailers did say, like, Kenny, we'll pay a bit more for truly local and take less on margin. For some retailers that are really committed to organic and to local, there is flexibility available, but you really have to engage and ask the hard questions and have that conversation with the buyer. Do's and don'ts. Um, What we heard across the board, definitely send personalized emails, follow up with a voicemail, keep it succinct, drop off samples, especially the natural food retailers, large and small, we talk to. They love to cut open an apple and take a bite out of a carrot and understand how it tastes and feels and looks. Um, Ask the buyers about gaps and their future needs. What do they need this year? And what are the trend lines they're seeing? Like, what do they think they're going to need a lot of next year as you're thinking about where to expand and diversify? Be patient, but persistent in your outreach. They're really busy and they're hard to get a hold of, but they do value communication, and they're not, no buyer I talked to was annoyed by farmers emailing or calling sometimes every day, to get their attention. What are don'ts? Don't expect farmers market prices. Have a real conversation about what their pricing structure and strategy looks like, and avoid any surprises. Don't chase trends. Some trends are really, durable and mature, but a lot of times we see trends in produce that are just fads. So talk to them about what they see as a trend and what they see as, a mature demand, and plan accordingly. They also very consistently said they love growers and farmers who love what they grow, who, have a story about why they're growing what they grow and how it fits into their local community and the sense of place of where they are. Definitely don't hide bad news. Don't treat price as the only win. Look at all the other elements of this relationship, and what makes it successful. Um, know what's saturated. And again, the buyers are a really good help with this. They may have 14 people from your county trying to sell them carrots or spinach or whatever it is. Talk to them about what's saturated and where they see white space and opportunities to provide stuff that they can't get their hands on. And don't presume transportation expectations. Be really frank and ask good questions about how they want their product to get to them, what condition, how it's packed, what time window. All of that stuff is really important and came up with several buyers as a potential pitfall. Um, I'm not going to talk through every bullet here because we're coming up against the hour, but for natural food retailers, we heard that local sourcing matters the most to that cohort. Going back to someone's earlier question, local matters the most to the natural food stores, the people that we talk to who have standards and are really committed to organic in their DNA, also care very much about local as to their customers. The natural food buyers really like samples. They like experienced growers. It doesn't mean they don't work with new growers, but I think newer growers need to show that you have the support and the technical assistance to be successful and provide a consistent supply. Relationships take time, and I think, the culture of the natural food world versus conventional kind of does create space for those building those long-term relationships. They cited gaps in organic flowers, which I know is a huge production area in the Pacific Northwest. Heirloom apples, also very relevant to this region. Culinary mushrooms. We see a lot of durable demand across the country among consumers for artisanal and culinary varieties of mushrooms. And culturally relevant produce that aligns with cultural and ethnic traditions in a given area, are really important. What did we hear from natural and organic wholesale buyers? So these are distributors more in the natural and organic space. They need their farmers and their producers to understand wholesale pricing, like what is the margin expectation of a distributor on top of the retailers. They like to see growers growing fewer things better rather than spreading themselves thin with a lot of different crops. Again, they want growers to understand what's saturated in their area, and a great way to learn is by talking with the distributor. They love to see cooperation. If they're sending a truck out to a rural area, they'd love to have a number of nearby farms with similar crops to pick up from. School districts are very different than retail buyers in a lot of ways. They have a formal bidding process usually that's required by the government that they're a part of. They have longer planning horizons than retailers. A lot of them around the country are working with food hubs because of their ability to aggregate products and provide consistent supply. A lot of districts we've talked to um, are showing a renewed interest in scratch cooking, largely because of missions and mandates in their districts to support students' health. And organic can play a role in those shifts in mindset for those facilities. They are cost sensitive, but they're very reliable payers. Grain buyers, both for human food and animal feed, very different to work with than any other category too. They rely on multi-year contracts typically, mandatory sampling and testing for contaminants and infestation and product quality, longer planning cycles, um, a preference for longer term relationships because of those multi-year contracts, longer planning cycles, and the need to deploy quality testing. And then the grain buyers we were talking to, all of them cited, and again, super relevant to Eastern Washington and Idaho and Eastern Oregon, unmet demand for field peas, lentils, milo, feed grain corn and soy, and high oleic soy for processing. And then organic fiber and seed. Organic fiber has a lot of infrastructural challenges, both in wool and cotton. We've seen a lot of the country's processing infrastructure disappear. In the cotton sector, weather conditions are a huge issue down south in California and Texas, New Mexico. Um, and that's a sector probably not too relevant to this region, but it's a sector where cooperatives are playing a really big role. Grower cooperatives, by consolidating supply, help address some of the variability in yield that happens across the growing region. For seed production, also a really important sector in the Pacific Northwest. Being a vegetable farmer isn't the same as being a seed farmer. There are legal requirements for seed quality. There's an incredible need to control weeds in the seed crop. A lot of very specialized composite sampling requirements from those buyers of seeds. Um, but they did cite incredible demand for cover crop seed, including radishes, oats, rye, and peas, all relevant to the region. But our recommendation there is just that, aspiring seed growers work with the right technical expertise to understand the really unique demands of that sector. Whew, last few slides, coming right up to the hour. So a few gray clouds. I meant to replace this with a less scary picture, but here we are. A few of the kind of red flags we saw that are worth being aware of and managing for. Misinformation. We see a lot of confusion among buyers, especially conventional buyers, on what the actual benefits of organic are. And I think for us as an agricultural sector, there's always opportunity to remind potential buyers like what goes into organic production, that it bans toxic and persistent pesticides, that it requires regenerative practices and cover cropping and methods that improve soil health. We see confusion, especially when we get into like a school district where a buyer might be new to organic and have a mandate to buy it, but not totally understand the benefits. Um, Regenerative is clouding the organic conversation a bit. We know the regenerative organic certification, the ROC program, requires USDA organic as its foundation. But there are other uncertified regenerative claims, both, either certified to specific standards or there's no legal requirements around regenerative, so anyone can use the word to describe whatever they want. And so I think it's really important for us to be reminding potential buyers of all of the regenerative practices that go into organic production. And then some sectors are incredibly challenged by price sensitivity. Organic fiber we talked about. Meat is another one because variability in the feed market is amplified in the cost of the finished product. And so I think there is some instability and some volatility there in pricing that we should be aware of and track really closely. But aside from those gray clouds, the horizon is really bright. Talking to these 23 buyers across these categories was really inspiring. I didn't get to talk to them all personally, but the folks on our team who did left feeling really rosy and hopeful and optimistic for the future of organic because of all these different buyers from different sectors who are really deeply into organic. The opportunities in school districts are enormous. The opportunities for bigger and deeper conversations and relationship building with buyers is amazing. A lot of buyers talked about nutrient density as something that was an emerging criteria. There's a growing awareness that crops grown in healthy soil using organic practices can tend to be healthier, both in terms of lacking pesticide residue, but also having higher levels of certain phytonutrients. And while that research is far off from where we can make a label claim, I think the general trend lines in research about soil health and nutrient density are really starting to gain awareness out there in the world. And then what we heard again and again is to love what you grow. Like buyers really crave that authentic story of a farmer who really just has a great, passionate way of explaining what they grow, where they grow, why they grow it, and how it fits into their region. And so that was really gratifying to hear from the buyers we worked with. And we are at the top of the hour. I somehow got through all those slides. If there are any lagging questions, please go ahead and pop into the Q&A or the chat. If there are not, that's okay too. I think in the chat here, some folks shared some really good resources. For myself, please reach out to me or to the Rodale Institute at markets@rodeleinstitute.org. Brenda highlighted the WSDA Regional Markets Program as a resource, and Claire at TILF provided the email address for the top program there, TOPP at tilf.org, for folks looking to connect with the regional top lead and all the partner organizations they're working with to foster organic transition in the region. So thank you all for being here. I really, really appreciate your patience. I hope that was really valuable. And look for the materials online next week. And don't hesitate to reach out if we can help you in any way. We'd love to. So thank you all. Have a great day.